When I first surrendered myself, they put me in solitary confinement for 21 days, which means I could not really try to find food for myself, like on a yard or through commissary or things like that. The first 5 days or so, they tried to give me regular food. I kept pushing it back through the meal slot saying, I'm not going to eat this. The judge ordered that I have a no meat option, but that didn't necessarily mean vegan. Sometimes they would be putting cheese and stuff on it. Especially if I was in solitary confinement, they're just sending you a tray. Eventually, they just started bringing me raw vegetables, but they were often moldy, and I ate them anyway. It was 190 when I went in. When I made it to North Carolina, I was 162. I lost a lot of weight. I could see my heart beat through my ribs. Like, that's how skinny I was then.
What the hell is up? My name is Jamie Logan, and I am here with Andy Stepanian, animal rights activist and former political prisoner. And today we are going to talk about his SHAC 7 campaign that ultimately led him to be convicted as a domestic terrorist in the United States of America. We're going to be talking about intersectionality and how to stay united as a movement. And we're going to be talking about how to support political prisoners and see where the conversation takes us. So thank you so much, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So it's hilarious because before I knew that Andy was a former political prisoner, I actually thought he was a child actor.
Yeah, all right.
So child actor turned domestic terrorist.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are.
I'm the bad Ferb Savage. Okay.
So it's a compliment. I mean, you're very animated, and I could see it. Honestly, if not a child actor, maybe you take up acting now as an adult.
I can't imagine that, but okay.
So, okay, why don't you give us a general introduction as to who you are?
Oh, gosh. I guess I'm an activist. Asterisks. I don't know exactly how to categorize that. I guess I care a lot. And when I was young, I had a few things happen that kind of like informed the way that I look at the world. Some of it, I'm not that publicly vocal about it, but it involved abuse from a neighbor, and that kind of made me identify with the plights of animals at an early age. So if I have to rewind the clock, I think one of the most formative moments that I remember was the Exxon Valdez spill, where I saw waterfowl covered with oil and having this sense of like suffocation, imagining what the animals were going through. And while I ate meat at that point in my life, I had this tremendous urge to like plead with my parents, like, let me go to Alaska, like let me help the animals. And I was like, like 9 or 10 years old, and that's what I wanted to do. By the time I was 13, I stopped eating meat, but I didn't go vegan until my first year of college when I met other vegans. I didn't know what a vegan was. And then I started doing undercover investigations, and that was like a slippery slope into animal rights activism and things like that. So my start to activism was rooted in like human rights and environmentalism at first, and then I slowly migrated more towards animal rights when I was in college.
And it is so true. It is a slippery slope. It's like once you become aware of the suffering and you see firsthand how big this issue is in terms of scale, in terms of the amount of individuals suffering, and also the amount of good-hearted people supporting that type of abuse towards animals, it becomes something where you can't stop thinking about it. You want to try everything in your power to do something. And so you kicked things up a notch. You went to protests and you did the leafleting thing, but what was the moment you realized that you needed to do something that was more high risk?
So going back to those younger years before I was vegan, I was vegetarian, I started working on environmental campaigns to stop the use of pesticides on Long Island. That was inspired by the death of my friend Elida's mother, who died of breast cancer, and learning about the pollutants and things like that were in our neighborhoods, Superfund sites, things like that. I got involved with public interest groups, and I started lobbying maybe 15, 16 around this time. I don't know exactly what year it was. It was around 15. And I was extremely impatient, right? Like now in my 40s, I realize like legislation is slow. It is a molasses, arduous process. And I'm older, more cynical, and a little bit more patient, right? At 15, no. I was like, I just spent the last 2 years trying to get this Neighborhood Notification Act passed. Like, how is it taking this long? The system sucks, et cetera, et cetera. I'm tired of pulling on the pant legs of legislators asking for scraps from the table. So when I learned about the horrors of fur farms and how many animals die for a fur coat and practices like anal and vaginal electrocution, things that were just like horrors that I didn't even imagine happening, I said, well, instead of like asking for help, I'm just going to start breaking the windows of fur shops. And I did this almost every night for almost 2 years. And I watched as several fur shops in Long Island went out of business. They just completely shuttered. And this is obviously different. I'm not going to encourage your viewers to go out and do that. I'm not encouraging criminal activity. I also think that the 90s and early 2000s are extremely different than today, where every house has a Ring camera. You know, like you have to take different operational security protocols. But there was something intoxicating in those moments of knowing that, like, okay, I took a business out of business. Could I do this at scale?
Mm-hmm. And for anybody thinking that the business is the victim here, I would encourage them to think about the animals. Is smashing a window in any way comparable to anally and vaginally electrocuting an animal and skinning them, oftentimes alive, taking their lives away from them for a jacket?
I also don't want to be hyperbolic, right? Like, I've heard prosecutors in the way they talked about me, like essentially make it seem like I'm a deeply cynical or mean-spirited person in targeting these industries. I don't actually harbor hatred for the furriers or the people that own the shops. I'm not hoping that they'll lose all their money and not be able to feed their kids. I don't think like that. I think more about like, how do I interrupt the mechanizations of capital and the exchange of these products and the sale of these animals that are commoditized, and how do I interrupt it? And so the shutting down of those businesses were strictly for the animals. It was for the love of the animals, not for the hatred of the people that are engaged in the industry. And
they could always switch to another job. And that's what many of them did. Amazing. And so this is kind of when you realized, okay, it's not enough. I need to do more. And ultimately, this led you into the SHAC 7 campaign.
So yeah, it was the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty campaign started in the UK, and it migrated here when a U.S. company provided them with a loan to bail them out. There was an early start to the campaign where people in England wanted to protest the Bank of New York. And that was because when they weren't listed on the normal stock exchange, they needed the Bank of New York to handle something called the American Depository Receipts for their stock, which was a UK company. And they sent a few people over. I remember it was a World Week for Animals Laboratories event that was at Washington Square Park. And they met, I don't know if the place is still around, Vegetarian's Paradise. We all met at Vegetarian's Paradise, and we spoke to the people from the UK, myself and my friend Lauren Gazzola, who is what ends up being one of the SHAC 7 with me. We didn't know there was going to be a SHAC campaign. This was just, we were two people from New York that are like, oh, you need help in New York? Sure. Kevin Jonas was from Minnesota. He flew over to the UK to help as a press officer. And he then eventually came back to help kind of facilitate the larger campaign against Huntington Life Sciences here in the U.S. They had 5 facilities. The bulk of them were in the UK, but one was in New Jersey, in East Millstone, New Jersey. At any given day, there was about 50,000 animals that were captive there and being tested on. They killed about 180,000 animals each year. Wow. They were the second largest contract research organization in the world at the time. And one thing that was unique about them is that they used dogs. And we knew that when trying to do outreach to the public, if we could do undercover investigations and exposés regarding beagle puppies, that this could be kind of like a segue to talk to the people about lesser animals, quote unquote, lesser animals in their eyes, because sometimes it's hard to articulate the rights of a rat to someone. It's a big step for them to take, but everyone has a dog in their home. So once they see this and they see the horrible treatment, we were getting kind of wholesale support from the public, and we were combining that with radical underground activism and above ground activism and this very unique pressure campaign that looked at the financial pillars of support for the company and not the company itself. It was this idea that if we kept going to East Millstone, New Jersey with placards and yell at a building saying, "You kill animals," they could be like, "Yeah, we know we do. This is what we do every day." But if we go after the janitorial services, if we go after the people that handle their stock, if we go after the people that handle the natural gas deliveries to the facility, electrical, everything, every bit of logistics that goes into that place, look at the corporation like it's an organism and starve it. And we were successful.
And that's exactly what you did.
$35 share price of LSRI at one point went down to about 1/10 of a penny on the stock exchange and then got delisted. Bankrupt twice and got bailed out in the form of terrorism insurance from the UK government. And then when that happened, they needed to articulate, well, who are the terrorists that they're getting the bailout for? And they had to serve up some people, and people in the UK and the United States were arrested.
Wow. And ultimately you faced a total of 3 years?
Yep. I got one charge. Some of my co-defendants got more than that. I had one charge for conspiracy to violate the Animal Enterprise Protection Act, which is a law that essentially stated that I utilized a facility in interstate and foreign commerce, in this case, the internet, and also traveling for the purposes of protest, with the intent of causing more than $15,000 in damages to Huntington Life Sciences. I could not articulate that I was doing anything other than that. Like, that was exactly my objective. And it was much more than $15,000. I was trying to completely bankrupt them, a $40 million company, right? So when I went to court, the defense was what we were doing was protected speech and protected activity. And that this law is broken and facially unconstitutional. At the end of the day, though, the superior courts, the appellate courts, upheld the conviction.
And this was the maximum sentence at the time for the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, and you were the first animal rights activist arrested under this.
I don't think I was. I
No?
think Peter Young and Justin Samuel were the first two people arrested underneath the Animal Enterprise Protection Act. Let me rephrase that. They weren't the first ones arrested. I was the first one arrested, but they were the first ones charged.
That's right.
They were on the run.
Right, that's what I
Yeah,
read.
they were on the run, and they weren't found. Their charges stemmed from a fur farm liberation.
Wow. And so when we talk about freedom of speech, and when we talk about just educating the public and simply showing them, look at these beagle puppies who were shaken and punched and thrown in cages and killed in these violent ways for this animal testing. And when you're educating people about this, where is that line between creating awareness and ultimately just telling the truth to the companies that are buying these products from the laboratories versus terrorism?
Well, there's a couple pieces to this, right? Like telling the truth and reporting on it is not a crime, right? But it depends on what state you're in. When they introduced the Animal Enterprise Protection Act and then the subsequent law, the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act in 2006, the company that was lobbying for it, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, was trying to include language that would criminalize photography and undercover investigations. Those did not make their way into the laws that were approved by Congress. So what they did instead is they continued with that same model legislation package, and they went on a state level, state to state to state, shopping it to local states, hoping to make that stick. And that's what we call ag-gag laws. So essentially all of this was supposed to be bundled together with one proposal from ALEC, but it never worked. And so they separated into two parts. And so in certain states in the United States of America, it is criminalized to take that photography and to film the way that Michelle Roque and Channel 4 News and Sky News did in the UK and here in the United States.
Which goes to show that if you can't even look inside these places and you don't want people to see what's going on, maybe we shouldn't be funding it or supporting it.
Exactly. This is, you know it's cliche, but sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? And a lot of people, whether they're purchasing products or they're corporations that are contracting to a laboratory like Huntington Life Sciences, would not choose to do a contract with an organization like that if they saw what was happening inside. They're given these packets that say, like, we treat our animals humanely and we care about the environment and we care about spillage and, safety and efficacy, etc. At the end of the day, what they care about the most is fulfilling the contract, selling a service, and that service could be as convoluted as providing Philip Morris with expert testimony that says that cigarettes do not cause cancer. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. That is just commonplace knowledge that cigarettes cause cancer.
Of course.
And while there was class action lawsuits in the 90s and the early 2000s, they contracted to Huntington Life Sciences saying, find us animals that give us data that cigarette smoke does not cause cancer. And so they took tens of thousands of rabbits and exposed them to cigarette smoke to come up with some data set that they could then introduce into court to hopefully get lesser penalties in their class action. It's not about them saying, we didn't do this. It's about them trying to mitigate the damage that they're facing. And so the contract was explicit. The contract was, show us data that shows us the opposite of the truth.
Oh my God. Total disregard for life. I mean, tens of thousands of rabbits. These animals are sentient. They feel pain. They're not different than our companion animals at home. And what I love so much about SHAC 7 is that you took the compassion and empathy that people have for dogs and created awareness around that, but also it appeals to that empathy, but then educates them to hopefully look further into it and ultimately get the conversation started about animals in our society. And so when we look at pressure campaigns and we look at general education surrounding animal rights in general, through your experience, what would you say you've learned through the surveillance that you went through the FBI raids, through the prison sentence that you had? What were some of the lessons that you learned and that you want activists working on things for the animals today to know?
I mean, there's like the granular answer to that question, and then there's like the top level answer to that question. The granular one would be like a masterclass that would go on for weeks talking about this.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of shortcomings that we had, lots of mistakes, lots of victories that could be replicated. There are some victories that will be limited to those decades, right? That can't be replicated today. I'm going through that with a current project I'm working on right now. I'm realizing that certain things don't parlay to 2025. And it was a sobering experience. It makes me feel old, right?
Secret project, you guys. I've tried asking about it.
And now I lost my train of thought.
So basically, what have you learned?
The top level is that it works.
Yeah.
Right? Like, somebody once told me, it was actually the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. I was in Madrid with him, and he said, capitalism would eat its legs if given the chance. And all we have to do is serve it its legs. And if they're in a race, it'll fall flat on its face. And while I have some criticisms of WikiLeaks and things that they've been involved with over the years, I was like, oh, that stuck with me, because it really will. Profit becomes the end-all, be-all. They lose sight of morals. They lose sight of everything. And sometimes, if you could make it financially painful for other people to have these relationships with these companies and turn them into pariahs, it's not going to require large-scale cultural buy-in from the rest of the country. You don't need to worry about influencing everyone to get behind you if you could just make them go bankrupt. When we talk about veganism and changing society, that's going to be a long, arduous process of speaking to people, showing people the truth, making foods easy and accessible to them so they can make these transitions. It's never one thing is the right answer, right? But when it comes to pressure campaigns, they still work. As long as capitalism functions the way it functions, then you could find those financial pillars of support. You could treat a corporation like it's an organism, and you could starve it to death.
Amazing, amazing. And while you were in prison and facing the consequences of the amazing actions that you did, can you tell me about what your experience was like there as a political prisoner?
Sure. It really oversimplified way to describe the 3 years that I spent was that I had a kick me sign on my back and a silver spoon in my mouth. I would get hundreds of letters from supporters, and it was beautiful and amazing. And it also became something that created animosity with other inmates. Like, why is, there, without turning into some sort of competition, like, put yourself in the shoes of a man or a woman who has been serving 6-7 months, hasn't gotten a single letter, and then some guy you don't even understand why he's there, gets 100 letters in an evening. And it a lot of things well up when people are on that mail line hoping to see a letter from their child or from a loved one or something. It's your window to the outside world. And along those lines, it speaks to just how resilient our movement was. When we went in, the whole movement said, well, you're not going in alone. We're going to be there with you. And every single one of those letters was like a little window to the outside world. So if all I'm looking at is a concrete wall, I get to hear about someone's trip to the beach, or what they did on the protest line that day, or what they had to eat. Like, sometimes people ask me, and I'm going to get into this talking about Zoe Rosenberg in a minute, but sometimes people are going to ask, like, well, what can I do? I don't know what to write, right? Like, we're in an age of texting and emails, and nobody wants to think about writing a physical letter. I don't know what to write about. And when she hears about your day or what you're doing, that's a form of escape for her. And she's going to need to see that. And we need to be supporting each other. And so those people who wrote me those letters and showed me that support while I was in jail are really the reason why I'm alive and still doing work today. Because I might not have been able to weather it psychologically without that.
Absolutely. What was a day-to-day like in jail, and what did you eat?
When I first surrendered myself, they put me in solitary confinement for 21 days, which means I could not really try to find food for myself, like on a yard or through commissary or things like that. They first 5 days or so, they tried to give me regular food. I kept pushing it back through the meal slot saying, I'm not going to eat this. They would say stuff like, oh, just eat the rice, leave the steak. And I'm, nope, not doing it. Because I knew that I'd be setting a standard there that, like, I'm okay with this, and I'm not. The judge ordered that I have a no meat option, but that didn't necessarily mean vegan. Sometimes they would be putting cheese and stuff on it. Especially if I was in solitary confinement, they're just sending you a tray. So sometimes they don't know, the person who's making it doesn't know who this is going to and things like that. Eventually, they just started bringing me raw vegetables, but they were often moldy, and I ate them anyway. So broccoli, cauliflower, those kinds of things. So it was a rough start, but by the time I made it to North Carolina, I was 190 when I went in. When I made it to North Carolina, I was 162. So I lost a lot of weight. I could see my heartbeat through my ribs. Like, that's how skinny I was then. And when I was in North Carolina, I started to kind of I had a big prison yard to work with, and it just opened. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try to run this place a little bit myself. Mm-hmm. And we started stealing from the officers' mess. Like, we found tofu. We got pasta. We started cooking it in mop buckets. Like, we were very resourceful. In retrospect, I'm like, oh, I hope we're not going to get cancer from all the plastic we cooked in. But there was a lot of interesting jury-rigged devices and stuff that we built, just to...
These are friends that you made in prison? Wow. Yeah. And they were vegan?
No, they were not vegan, but the Italian mob was giving me Barilla pasta and fresh garlic, and we were cutting it up with razor blades in our cell. It was, especially around the holidays, people would get together and try to cook a meal together. So there was a lot of support. I think some people just thought it was interesting that I was standing on business and refused to budge about my veganism. And so sometimes people would just kind of go by my cell and throw me an orange or something. People were generally nice. You have to be cautious in those settings, especially in the higher security settings, that sometimes people want things in return. So I was very cautious about accepting handouts. But, over time, you start to realize who's, got your back and vice versa. And,
Right. And do you think of anybody that's still in there often?
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Malik Umari was a good friend of mine in Butner, North Carolina, where I spent 2 years.
Mm.
And him and I are still friends. He got out early after the Obama administration changed the crack law. So he was facing 35 years, and he got out after about 18. And I bought him a laptop and a suit the day he got out. And he is a Forex trader now. He has several properties in North Carolina. He's doing great for himself, and we still stay in touch. He always texts me, asks me if I'm going to run for mayor of New York. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that.
You should.
No, I should not. Absolutely not. I do not have that kind of stuff in me.
This is, I mean, amazing to hear that he had such a successful story coming out of prison, but it's not like that for most prisoners.
And he was vegetarian. Like, well, I don't know if he initially identified as vegetarian, but him and I used to eat lunch together, and he kind of veered towards vegetarianism.
You also taught yoga in prison, I remember telling you that.
That was by accident. It was because I started going to the yoga program, and then my buddy Mohammed, who was teaching it, got out, and he said, would you be willing to take over for me? And so I just kind of shadowed him for a while. I do not know if I was teaching yoga correctly. Prison yoga is like, more aerobic than anything else. But I had photocopied sheets of what I'm supposed to do, the sun salutation and stuff. And so I tried.
If it settles the mind, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
That's what yoga is it's just that peaceful state of mind.
But then in the last 6 months, I went to the CMU at the USP Marion. So it was a maximum security setting. And when I was there, it was essentially viewed as like a terrorist unit. So the people who were there were alleged to have affiliations with Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Al-Shabaab, Shia militia in Iraq, a group called the Liberty Seven, and then white supremacist groups were there, like the Order. Yeah.
So you're with actual violent people, violent terrorists that want to blow people up.
Well, in fairness, what I saw of the Muslim men that were there is I did not see that. Oh. The only people that I saw the violence from was from the white supremacists. Yeah. What I could say, and I don't mind saying in front of the camera, was that there was only one Muslim gentleman who was there who I saw as any kind of national security threat.
Really?
Yeah. Out of the rest of them that were there, I just saw them as like donating to the wrong charity. You have to think, like, after 9/11, there was this rabid prosecutorial period where they were charging people and overcharging people for things like material support to terrorists. And that law is so overbroad that people, like one guy that was in there he was a software developer from Florida, and he gave a ton of money, like nearly $1 million, to build an orphanage in Sarajevo. But the people who he contracted to build the orphanage were, I don't know how to make an American analogy for it, but like in like the U.S., there's like the Elks Lodge and kind of like fraternal orders like that there's something like that in the Balkans, that when during a time of war, those construction unions will take on the role of being a militia. And so during the Balkan War, they were a militia, and now that it's no longer a time of war, they're a construction union. And so he gave money to that construction union to build the building, the orphanage that he built.
Right.
After 9/11, that group that was celebrated during the Clinton administration as being freedom fighters were redesignated as an Islamic extremist group by the Bush administration. Once that designation happened, then it became he gave money to an Islamic extremist organization with ties to violence, and he got charged with material support to terrorists. Yeah.
And is he still in jail, you think?
Oh, he was facing life indefinitely. And in 2020, I filed a declaration with the Supreme Court during the first Trump administration and got him free.
Wow.
He now lives in Rwanda, and he texted me 2 nights ago.
That's amazing. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I fought to get him out. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
he's a very wonderful, wonderful man. When I arrived there, he heard that I was vegan, And he like set aside all these food items and put them on my bed. He had spent 5 years alone without speaking to another human being before he met me and the other people that arrived at the CMU. He was in solitary confinement for 5 years in Miami.
Oh my.
So I was one of the first people he met, and he like hugged me like I was his best friend. It was very sad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, the fact that you were facing prison for trying to get puppies out of a laboratory and just raising awareness about it and trying to bankrupt a company that's torturing animals, it says a lot about this current system and that, yeah, maybe things aren't so ethical in our court of law, court of justice. But speaking of which, we have a friend, Zoe Rosenberg, who currently is facing half a decade in prison for rescuing 4 chickens from a Purdue factory farm. And Zoe is also a diabetic, and she has a feeding tube. And so this could be a life-threatening sentence for Zoe. So what are your thoughts on this, and how can we best support her?
So Zoe, I remember Petaluma Poultry articulated that the 4 chickens that she rescued were worth no more than $22 to $24 to them. Mm-hmm. When she found them, they were in near death state, right? And she nursed them back to health. She rescued them. She saved their lives, and now they live at her sanctuary. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. This entire case cost the government of California as much as $1 million to prosecute. So it's not about getting that $24 back. It's about the message and the inspiration that Zoe helped cultivate by freeing those animals, showing the conditions that they're kept in, and highlighting the fact that Petaluma Poultry is one of the suppliers to Trader Joe's, and Trader Joe's likes to, essentially portray themselves as like kind of like safe, green, crunchy, and in that marketing, well, no, in this marketing mix, your supply chain is all, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, it's all fucked up.
It is.
Right? And they put a lens on that. They put sunlight on that. And what's happening in Northern California, what's happening with Zoe, what DXC is doing is creating an existential threat to the farms in Northern California because they are afraid that if they get redesignated as CAFOs, high-intensity feedlots or factory farms, that under California state law, they will no longer exist. Mm-hmm. And they're highlighting that despite their making small changes, the standards there, the abuse there is just the same. You could have one wall exposed or something in order to become compliant and no longer be a factory farm by legal standards. But what you're doing in practice is the same kind of abuse. And that's what they're really trying to shed light on. And that's what this case is ultimately about, is that Zoe spoke truth to power. Zoe saved some lives. It was the analogy of the starfish thrower, that those lives mattered. Mm-hmm. And that in doing so, she is making the industry afraid. And the industry went to bat. Not that they want to lock up Zoe specifically, but they want to send a message to the rest of the movement. And the way that we respond is to say, no, we're going to be stronger. We're going to do more of this. We're going to keep going, because if you do this to one of ours, we're going to hit you 10 times harder. This is not Zoe instructing us to do this. It needs to be emphatic that Zoe is separated from it.
Right.
It's the idea that if you do this to one of our own, we push back harder, because then it no longer becomes a viable tactic for them. And so in the case of Zoe Rosenberg, what we should be doing is we should be advocating to the courts and to the jail itself, if she does get remanded into custody, to make sure that she has everything she needs for her health. Mm-hmm. What people could be doing right now, if this comes out before her sentencing on December 3rd, and you're near Santa Rosa, get yourself to the courthouse. Go to her sentencing. Show the court how many people from the public support her and are standing by her during this time. I'm going to be there. I know a bunch of other activists are going to be there. A lot of human rights activists are also going there to show support. Human rights channels and other kinds of media are covering it as well, so it's not limited to just our echo chamber. And then in addition to that, you could notify Trader Joe's and say, sever your contract with Petaluma Poultry. Also, after she's in, there may be specific things that she needs. So it may, and this is not something we just want to do willy-nilly. DXC, Cassie, those individuals will lead on the messaging on this, but there may be a need to say one day, call the warden. She is not getting her insulin, right? If something like that happens, 1,000 phone calls to the jail. Get her insulin immediately. Maybe a protest outside the jail. But we just do not present that stuff first because we don't want to create a situation where they think all we're trying to do is make their lives difficult, and then in turn, they take it out on Zoe.
Right.
So the idea is that we don't just jump out there with a bunch of rash things. We let them know that we're strong. We let them know that we have a large presence and that we're going to get her back every step of the way.
And
then,
this is ultimately if she ends up going to jail. We're waiting to hear about the sentencing, but hopefully she doesn't.
Yeah, the maximum she faces is 5 years underneath the statute. It's unlikely that she's going to get the 5 years. The probation department, which submits a set of guidelines to the judge, has made a recommendation of jail time. But I don't know if they've articulated how much jail time. The prosecution, I believe, will probably ask for something like 6 months. I don't think they're going to get it. I think the judge will likely downward depart from there, but I don't know how much. You know, she could get an ankle monitor and probation for 2 years, or she can get 6 months. I'm not really sure.
This is really important, guys. We must support Zoe. And ultimately, I do recommend speaking with a lawyer or having legal representation before you take any actions yourself. And, you know, Zoe has been working with DXE, Direct Action Everywhere, and she's very strategic about her approach. And this idea of open rescue, where you go into these places, take out sick and dying animals with your face shown, is sending a message to the industry and to the public at large that we should be able to rescue an animal that is in need, and we should be able to bring these issues to light. And compassion is not a crime. And that's why we're going to show our face and show that we are proud to help another animal that is in need and that's suffering. Because if we were in that situation, we would hope somebody would do the same for us. And if we see a dog that's in a hot car, it's completely legal to smash the window of that car and rescue that dog. So what is the difference when it comes to an animal that's behind a wall that's suffering and dying from disease, from broken bones, and ultimately that needs care? Because when you think about it too, those animals, the chickens that she rescued, would have been killed before they even reached the slaughterhouse anyway. The farmers would have culled them, would have thrown them in the trash. So it's not even profit for the industry anyway. So as you said, they're trying to make an example out of her, but we really need to rally and come together for this. So
the Right to Rescue campaign, I believe it's righttorescue.org, or maybe you could put it on the screen.
Yeah.
It's .com. But the Right to Rescue campaign is extremely important because it's taking that same sentiment that you see in the law regarding an animal that's in a car, hot and suffocating, and your right to break that window to rescue that animal. It's taking the legal framework of that and it's applying it to things like farmed animals. And so where this will likely become reality is in the appellate phase, because they can't litigate this in the trial phase itself. She has to bring it in front of the appellate court, which is going to happen now because she's been convicted. She has a right to appeal.
Right.
So during the appellate court, they're going to start articulating terms like this. Eventually, with enough of these cases, I think it will stick.
The worst part is they weren't even allowing her to provide evidence of what she saw, which is the craziest part. And that's the most unfortunate part, because that's what she was going to use as a defense, saying we have evidence and footage that the animal is suffering, and therefore that is why I went in to go and save that animal. But without being able to use that evidence, what is the defense here?
It was exactly the same in my case. We could not show anything that the animals were subjected to inside Huntington Life Sciences. We were barred from it.
Because they're not persons, as the court says? Or
no, it was that they wanted to focus on the actions of like the home protests and the information disseminated on the internet, and saying it wasn't relevant to what we were. They essentially won that argument in front of the judge, which I think is nonsense, because the jury had no idea essentially why we were doing what we were doing. But just to kind of rewind a few steps, in 2001, April, myself and a handful of others broke into HLS and freed the dogs. This was before the start of the campaign, one day before the start of the campaign. And I remember thinking back then, we didn't claim it as the ALF. Sometimes we would do actions and say, well, this is an ALF action.
Animal Liberation Front.
Yeah, Animal Liberation Front. We actually wrote a communique that went to the police that said concerned citizens did such and such. And the reason why we chose concerned citizens and not ALF is we didn't want this idea of it being this like anonymous, specialized group or, you know, folk heroes that broke into a place and freed animals. It was just regular, everyday people who did. And one of the things that I find so inspiring about the open rescue efforts of DXC and Zoe and others is this idea that they're no longer doing the cloak and dagger kind of, underground actions. They're going out in the open. So it's a combination of civil disobedience and direct action. And this is something that shows people that everyday folks are able to go and do this. It's not limited to some specialized set of people. I often get like a lot of intimidation coming on shows like this because I think that sometimes it slips into this idea that there's someone from the past that did this interesting work and it can't be replicated. Mm-hmm. The truth is the people who are going to be doing the best work are here now. They're around us. They might be you, Jamie. They might be anybody who's listening to this. And you're probably more skilled, more creative, smarter than I've ever been. And you're going to do amazing work. And we need to keep inspiring others to do that. And I think that Zoe's actions does that. We're over on time.
And this is the perfect time to segue into how do we stay united as a movement? Because I think that right now the most pressing issues that we're facing as a movement is the infighting. And oftentimes the government will hire people to disrupt our community and cause fights and issues because we are so much more powerful when we work together. And one, I think, relevant and current topic is the conflict in the Middle East, and people feel passionate on both sides of the issue, and it causes them to fight and to not want to work together. And actually what we had discussed a few weeks ago about having you on the podcast was I had an activist on who shared how he felt that human rights was an impediment to animal rights because he says that it was causing infighting and he felt that it was taking away from the vegan message. So I am curious from your perspective, what is intersectionality? Why don't you just define it for everybody and talk about why you are an intersectionalist, I guess you could say.
Well, it's not an identity, I'll tell you that much. So I'm not an intersectionalist.
Okay.
So for me, like, and this might be true for other people that are watching this, for me, being vegan's like breathing, right? It's a baseline. Yeah. It's not actually activism. It's just I'm always going to be vegan. And then the animal activism that I do is on top of it, right? And I view intersectionality kind of the same way, is that I'm always trying to look at things through this idea of like what structural systems of implicit bias and prejudice are fueling the mistreatment of people, the environment, and animals. It all kind of comes from this rapacious place of ownership or dominion, and that you could subjugate others or subjugate the environment or
dominate.
Yeah. So for me, I'm always kind of trying to be reflective of that, about how does this happen? How does this happen in interpersonal relationships? How does this happen geopolitically? How does it happen when we have our relationships with the animal nations and why we feel it's okay for us to subjugate them and put them in factory farms? So that's how I start my analysis of thinking about animal rights, and that's how I came to it, because I came to it by way of human rights. Mm-hmm. So while the individual who you interviewed, I don't think I agree with them, I'm not going to like bark them down either because I don't see it as useful.
Right.
There's a couple things I love saying. The first is, God, I'm going to sound like I'm some sort of band nerd, but Propagandhi had a line in a song that was like, with friends like this, who needs COINTELPRO? Uh-huh. And for people who don't know what COINTELPRO is, during the J. Edgar Hoover years of the FBI, it was a program called the Counterintelligence Program, and they actually deliberately caused infighting in the civil rights movement. and tried to, wrote letters to Martin Luther King trying to convince him to kill himself and things like that. This is what this program actually did. That program, after the church committee was sunsetted, and hopefully the FBI does not replicate COINTELPRO type tactics, even though people say that in various silos they do, but there's not a counterintelligence program anymore. So they say. I don't know. There's weird stuff happening. New stuff's happening. I don't know what it's called now. And then the other line is also from a band. Jeff Rickley had in a song, so often we create communities only to use them as exclusionary devices. And I've always held on to that one. And that is that people sometimes like wearing a badge, right? Like,
yeah,
I have a pin on right now, right? Like, this is not my identity, right? Like, yeah, my grandmother lived in Palestine, but it's not my identity. It's not who I am. I guess who I am is someone who wants to fight to make the world better for animals and people and for the environment, and try to leave it incrementally better than when I came into it, right? And that's the closest thing I have to some sort of identity. Or maybe, I don't know, I like surfing, I like painting. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, those are things that kind of shape my identity. My identity is not that I'm an intersectionalist vegan. My identity is not that I'm a vegan. That's just how I eat, because to me that's like breathing, right? So if I was to take certain parts of my politics and say, this is my identity, and then use it like a club to say, if you're not exactly comporting to the way that I think, you're another, then you're perpetuating that divisiveness.
Exactly.
So when we talk about extending our circle of compassion to include others, I could be advising the protesters at Columbia on how to go after the endowment or go after Elbit systems in their pro-Palestine protests. And I might say to them, never lose sight of the humanity of the people who died on October 7th. Because sometimes during real spirited protests, people just lose sight of the humanity of the people who have done horrible things. For the atrocities to happen in Palestine, people had to lose sight of the humanity of Palestinians. For the atrocities that happened on October 7th, the people who fought that day in the resistance had to lose sight of the humanity of the people that they killed. They had to create that distance. And that is something that we do every day with animals that are on our plates.
Totally.
They're a cutlet. They're in a styrofoam package. They sanitize it with words like chuck as opposed to saying mother cow. They do this to create distance between you and the product you're consuming, because they know if there's proximity, they know that if you stare that animal in the eyes, you're less likely to slit that animal's throat. You're not going to want to do that. And so they create that distance. Why would we want to create distance between potential allies in this extremely marginal and small movement for animals? That doesn't mean you abandon the things that you care for. It doesn't mean if I run into someone, like, I shouldn't say names on this podcast, right? But like, I know there are certain individuals that are extremely pro-Israel in our movement. And I also know that some of those individuals have been instrumental in banning or working to ban horse carriages here in the United States, in New York, right? And I could say, hey, I disagree with you about your thoughts on Israel, but I'm really grateful that you're doing this to help these horses. And if we're sharing a meal, would you be willing to hear me out as to why I feel this way? Because the moment you start bum rushing them at like some event and trying to shut them down, do some cancel culture stuff, like people communication wise, they put up a wall.
Totally.
Right? They put up a wall and they're like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't want to hear it.
Nothing productive.
Right? And then there's no communication on either side. Right? Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes when we engage in our protest tactics, we come out forcefully and unapologetically, and there's no more negotiation. And that's because that's a strategic idea. And it usually is part of protest and pressure campaigning. But if we're actually trying to negotiate, that's usually not the thing you do first. Right? That's usually the thing you do last. And so I think for these folks, and I'm not going to name and shame individuals who are engaging in this kind of thing, but taking something like intersectionality and turning it into an identity is essentially creating a community for the purposes of making an exclusionary device.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make an exclusionary device, you're not building movement, you're not building capacity. That's not you both sizing an issue by trying to build coalition. You're trying to find a way to build together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I've been on the receiving end of some of this hate. It's like you're out here saying that you're for peace and for human rights, yet you're bullying people left and right because they're not outspoken about your views. And I mean, just an example, a few months ago, I organized the Animal Rights March with a friend of mine, and these pro-Palestinian vegan activists showed up and tried to hijack the march. And they brought their own posters, which is fine. There's nothing I can do about, what you want to bring or show up as. We're on a public street. But it was the one day that we really just wanted to focus on the animals because there's been so much conflict and division within the movement. And it's not really the time or place to be bringing up so many of the other conflicts that are happening to the environment or to human rights, or we really just want to focus on the food system, farmed animals that are used for food, clothing, entertainment, and keep it narrow to that, to avoid fighting that might happen or occur at the march. And a specific activist in general started going on the megaphone, calling myself names, calling the other organizer names, taking over the protests, saying their own chants. And we had given, the chants that we had to the other people that were there. There were about 500 protesters. And so everybody was on board, knew what they were going to do. And this individual brought a megaphone and started. And it's like, this is not a way to bring me or anybody else closer to your cause. In fact, it totally, as you said, made me shut down. It made me lose respect, and it really made me, I think in that moment I was angry, but now I'm just like, all right, like there's no point in focusing my energy on it. But what made me feel really bad was that there were activists who showed up to the march who left because they were so uncomfortable and felt unsafe because of these individuals, Jewish activists in particular. And that's heartbreaking to me. I don't want to ever create an environment where somebody feels unsafe or that they have to leave an animal rights protest because people are protesting something else at our event. It's like there were probably 10 other pro-Palestine protests that were happening the day of the Animal Rights March, which only happens once a year, that those people could have gone to. I don't see vegans showing up at pro-Palestine marches and asking them to talk about animal rights.
You're correct in that last part, but you said a lot.
Yes. So let's break it down. Sorry. I could go on and on about this. I mean, it's inappropriate.
I think there are ways to do animal rights activism and show your support for other causes. Mm-hmm. Without creating disruption. That could be something as small as wearing a pin or whatever else. And then if, I don't want to talk about people's religions, but if somebody says, hey, I take exception to your pin, or I find your pin threatening, then usually the right answer is, well, why? Why do you find it threatening? Like, here's an example. They make these pins as a slice of watermelon in the shape of the contour of the state of Israel. I don't wear that one. I don't wear that one because sometimes I think people would interpret it as like a visual iteration of the slogan "From the river to the sea," which I know some people interpret as a threatening chant, right? I don't necessarily interpret it that way, but the fact that other people do is the reason why I don't use that saying, right? Simply because people receive it in a negative way. I'm trying to help people understand what I'm trying to stand for. I'm not trying to make people feel uncomfortable.
Right. We are here for nonviolence. We don't want anybody to be harmed. And I think that's like nonviolent actions. You've done this your whole life. And I really love to focus on animal rights and veganism because I think it's the root cause to war, to violence, to suffering. And when we
can I ask you why?
Sure. When we are able to look at a chicken or a cow or a pig and say, you are an individual and you deserve to live. You have the right to be here, just like I do. we can surely look at each other and people within our species and have respect. And I think that as long as slaughterhouses still exist, there will never be peace on this earth. And we could expect war after war after war. And it's almost like overwhelming sometimes, like not knowing where to focus and what to speak up about. And that if I use my social media that's geared towards veganism and animal rights to speak about other issues, I have found that it dilutes the message when I've tried doing that, when it dilutes the vegan message, because you're presenting people with so much information. And also I would never want somebody to not hear the vegan message because they don't agree with my views on supporting the Ukraine or, things like that. So I just don't publicly post about it. And I don't think that activists that are vegan should be bullied into making a statement.
Well, I agree with that. You can't be saying you have to have this set of talking points, because then that's just, I don't know what that is, but that's not the world that we want to live in.
And calling me white supremacist and all these names, it's pretty shocking.
Well, I think sometimes that is because of a lack of political maturity.
For
right?
sure.
It's also amplified by social media. People get driven to silos. The algorithm is pushing people to see things that are one specific way and not being exposed to different audiences and different things. So once you're in that silo, then rhetoric like that becomes more normalized, because you think anything outside of that is that same distance that we're trying to avoid. It's essentially creating distance. So for all that social media has done to try to bring people together and to create mass mobilization through algorithmic recommendations, it's now driving people further apart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole other problem that needs to be fixed with legislation. I don't know. I would love to see regulation that imposes reverse chronological order on platforms. I've advocated for it for 10 years to no avail, because the companies love algorithmic recommendation as their bread and butter. But in terms of the confrontations, there's merit to the idea, and these are the people that were disruptive. There's merit to the idea that silence in and of itself is a form of violence. Mm-hmm. And so saying that we can't talk about the issues in Palestine is kind of forwarding the idea of maintaining that silence because we don't want to alienate others. And then in doing so, atrocities continue to happen because of that silence. Now, in this particular moment that we're living in, yes, pro-Palestine protests are a very large part of the protest fabric here in New York City, right? I do think it's important for people to draw those connections between abuse and abusive systems. And I also think it's important the way that you drew the same connection between slaughterhouses and the way that we look at each other. I would say that I agree with you about 95%, right, on that. And the 95% is that, yes, you're absolutely right. If we extend our circle of compassion to include the smallest creatures, when we start thinking about roaches and rats and mice and things like that in laboratories, then, and we're worried about abuse that they're facing, then abuse to a young woman in Ukraine or a child in Palestine or anything else seems so much more abhorrent. It's like, well, how could we possibly do that? But then there's this 5%, right? And I think it's something rooted in human nature that we need to evolve away from. It's going to take time. Is that I'll make an example of the RSS, right? In India, Hindu people have extreme reverence for the environment and animals. It's just part of their culture, right? But then the RSS is engaging in essentially nationalist, socialist behavior, cracking down on ethnic minority groups and committing violence against them. So this is something I think that's in human nature. It's not limited to India, right? It's happening, like we just talked about in Israel-Palestine, the idea that there could be people with 5 different kinds of citizenship in the occupied territories, essentially saying there's an apartheid system. It's saying there are 5 different grades of person. It happened here in the United States when, white slave owners were saying that slaves were, 1/5 of human beings or 4/5 or whatever their way they articulated it back then, saying they're not fully human.
It's about that differing, as you said.
And the othering, the creating of the distance. Yeah. So I think it's a problem that we have as humans. I think it's a problem that may come from nature. You know, we look at flocks of seagulls, right? There's a seagull that has a bad arm or, you know, is sick. The rest of the seagulls will attack that seagull. Why? I think it's likely genetically encoded in them to try to see their genome pool be, you know, pure moving forward, healthier moving forward. So it's something that's kind of been built into us from nature. And so if we have this and now it's combined with technology, society, interpersonal politics, that's still kind of in us, right? We need to learn to overcome that.
Totally.
And so that's going to require a spiritual, mental, and physical evolution, because we might not be able to change our DNA. I mean, maybe we will in the future. I don't know. But we're not going to be able to change that part. And we need to learn to overcome that.
I love that you said that. And for me, it's my spiritual journey. I've unlearned so many things and tried to just reflect on, like, I can't be perfect, but how can I be better? And maybe, and be open to being wrong about things. And I really appreciate you sharing so much of your wisdom and your time. And I think that it's offered me a new perspective for sure. I think, you know, the other day I was out on the street doing interviews. I was with Dr. Faraz Harsini, who I love, from Allied Scholars. And we met this man who said that he has too much on his mind. He can't think about veganism. He's more worried about racism. He's more worried about Palestine. He's more worried about biodiversity, he said, sexism. So it's just too much for him to worry about veganism. How would you respond to that?
The way that we treat the least of us is reflected in the way that we treat the most of us. And there's only so much we can do in our individual lives to impact the world globally. Being vegan is something you could do right now to change the way that you interact with the world and the way that you consume. It's not the end, and it could be the beginning, but it shouldn't be the end all be all to your activism. But it's something that you build from, and you use that, and you use that empathy, and you carry that empathy to all these other issues, right? When we look at animals and we look at veganism, we make those choices because we dig into a deep well of empathy to say, that animal that's suffering on that farm, who I've never met and I'm not going to meet, is worth something. They have inherent worth, and I'm going to recognize that in my food choices for the rest of my life. Once you become familiarized with that deep well of empathy and compassion, you extend that to the people around you. You know, you keep some extra cash in your pocket. If you see someone on the street who's suffering, you give them some cash. You hold a door for someone that, you know, might not be as able-bodied as you. You maybe protest for Palestinians. You know, you take it elsewhere. You think about implicit bias in systems and how in communities like Ferguson, this is someplace where I worked for over a year, the entire city was funded by essentially racially motivated traffic stops. That's how they were making their money. And that was leading to all these flashpoints with the police and this extreme tension and discourse and discord in the community that led up to the killing of Michael Brown and the fallout that happened after that. And you take that empathy, you take that compassion, and you extend it to all the work that you do throughout your life, and you help make changes to the systems that he's worried about. You know, him thinking about racism, him thinking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, him thinking about biodiversity, which, I mean, there's tremendous intersections between biodiversity and the way that we destroy the environment and our consumption of animals for food. But you could just say, you know, from the rainforest to monoculture for things like raising soybeans and wheat to feed animals on feedlots is a tremendous threat to biodiversity. But there's like a million things you could talk to him about. But
people want to walk, they want to talk the talk, but don't want to walk the walk, and that's really what it's about. I could sit here all day long and say, Andy, I support human rights. But if I'm not doing anything about it, do I really? I mean, this is what I'm saying. So he could say to me all day long, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist. But when it comes to being vegan, it kind of forces you every day to live in alignment with your values. So it's kind of, I think it actually points out people who truly want to align their values with their actions, because every day you can do that by being vegan. There is so much that I still want to cover with you. We've hit the hour mark.
I'm sorry.
But I think we got through a lot. And I hope that this was informative for you guys and entertaining. And I mean, my God, I'm so inspired by everything you've done. I thank you for your service. And I mean, really, from child actor to domestic terrorist.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for your service, Jamie. I salute you.
Where can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, people could find me at The Wonder Years. It's a show that I did. I hate this so much. I am not Fred Savage.
My favorite character.
I'm the vice president for Ballester Media, where we handle communications for major nonprofits. I'm also the co-founder of the Sparrow Project, which provides free PR and public relations and public advocacy services to people, mostly prisoners, and other people that are facing consequences in the legal system, and do that work for free. So if anyone is ever in hot water, activism-wise, like...
Because you're also a lawyer.
Oh my God, no, I'm not.
Oh.
Next, you're going to ask me if I'm a notary. That happened too.
He's also a doctor and a brain surgeon.
Oh my God, stop. How did these things start?
I think highly of you.
Gosh, the gray hairs, the frosted business. People think I'm a lawyer. Oh man. Can we do the cut thing?
We'll wrap things up now. You guys know where to find me. I'm at It's Jamie's Corner. Please like this podcast, rate it, subscribe. It helps. It goes a long way. Andy, thank you so much.
Subscribe to Jamie's thing.
And please follow Andy Stepanian on Instagram. You can find him. He's on there.
I'm on there.
All right, guys. Until next time, I'll see you around. Bye.